What's going on, guys? I'm Pete and welcome to Retro Game Attic. So here I have my Glacier Game Boy Advance that I actually snagged for $10 at Goodwill a few months ago. I've been thinking of things to do with it and I figured why not try to modify it. I know IPS kits are pretty popular in these because the original screen obviously doesn't have a backlight and they're pretty hard to see. So in this video, I'm going to go through the steps of how I install the IPS kit in this thing. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so first up, we'll get a better look at this Game Boy Advance right here. As you can see, it's in pretty good shape. I've showcased this before on a recent pickups video, but I just wanted to give you guys a better sense of what we're working with here. I'll pop in a game. And everything seems to be working fine. So let's take this thing apart. So I'm going to be removing the screws with a tri-wing security screwdriver. These are pretty common. I'll throw a link to it in the description. So we'll take the game out, take off this weird pelican grip. It's not really my thing. Set that aside, pop the batteries out. And then as you can see on the back, there are a total of, it looks like 6 tri-wing screws. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there is one small Phillips head screw in the battery compartment. Alright, so those 6 tri-wing screws are out, and now we'll move on to that one little Phillips head screw down in the battery compartment. Alright, so now that we got the screws out, the back half of the shell should just lift right out. And there it is. So now we can get a better look at the inside of here. It appears to be in really good shape, so it's definitely a good candidate for this IPS screen install. So before we move forward with the messing around more with the GBA, I will show off what I got from Handheld Legend. This is the Game Boy Advance 3.0 version 5 IPS Backlight Kit. It is a drop-in kit, so there is no soldering required, which is great for me. So here's everything that came in the kit. We have a little warning here that says to test before installation. And then here is the kit itself. So we'll pop this bag open. Alright, we have the connectors here, some wires, the insulating film. Here is the display itself, and then here is the control board. So before we move forward with the install, the first thing we need to do is to identify the amount of pins we have on our GBA, and you can kind of see a little bit underneath the ribbon over there. It's a 40 pin. So out of the 2 cables that they gave us, it looks like the thicker one would be the 40 pin. So here we have the 32 pin variant on the left and then the 40 on the right. So this is the one we're going to use. So now we're going to connect the ribbon cable to the display controller board. That's going to be a little difficult to see. And we'll close it up and that should be good. All right, so yeah, that is connected. So then once it's connected, the instructions recommend that we put a little bit of double-sided tape underneath the board to kind of keep the board from sliding around. So I have a little bit of double-sided tape right here. I'm just going to take a little tiny bit. I'm just going to cut off like a sliver of it. So we'll stick it onto the back of the control board, and then we will fold it over so it sticks to the back of the IPS display. And that's it. That's not going anywhere. Now it's time to connect that ribbon cable, so we'll grab that 40 pin cable and we'll turn it over and then connect it to the control board. So we'll pop that little tab up on the control board, kind of slide that pin in there a little bit, snap that pin in place. Okay, cool. Next up, we're going to remove the ribbon cable from the console itself. 2 little tabs kind of pop up, and we'll take that ribbon cable out. And now we'll attach the ribbon cable for the new IPS screen just to give it a dry test before we install this thing. And we'll close up those 2 tabs. All right. So I think I got a little bit ahead of myself. I should probably remove the motherboard from the GBA itself before I do this dry test. So I'm going to try to pull this board out, take out the L&R shoulder pads. Okay, so there are a couple of screws holding this board in. It looks like 1, 2, 3 Phillips head screws. So let's get those out. Okay. So that board should just lift right out, and there it goes. All right, so moment of truth. We have the batteries popped in there. Let's turn the console on and see if the screen works. Whoa, look at that. That screen looks awesome. All right, now that we know that the screen does work, we will clean this thing up. We'll finish the install, and then we'll make sure that everything's good to go, and then maybe test out a game or 2. Now let's detach the screen from the motherboard once we get it popped off the back half of the shell. Pop up those tabs. So next up we need to remove that original screen and kind of just pry to the left of the D-pad. We'll see if I can get in there. All right, seems to be coming up. Just gonna lift it very slowly. I don't want to damage the original screen. Alright, that actually came off super clean. So there is the original screen. We have that taken off. And then we will get that IPS screen all set up here. So here is how it's oriented. I'm not going to stick it in yet. I'm kind of just going to do a dry run here. And here are these little spacers that came with it. It looks like one goes on the bottom. So here's that second spacer. It looks like that one goes to the left side of the screen. It's actually going to be a little bit of a tight squeeze. Okay, now that we have everything lined up pretty well, I'm going to remove the IPS screen. And then we can reorient those spacer pieces to make sure it lines up pretty well. And I'm going to peel off the protective plastic film from the IPS screen and work on lining it up. I want to make sure it's flush to the bottom left-hand corner of both of those spacer pieces. So that looks pretty good. And then from here, there's two little touch sensor attachments. Those are those two red wires. One is going to go on the top, sort of like the middle of the console, and then the bottom will go on like the bottom left of the console. And then all you have to do to get those in there, just peel off the adhesive strip protector, and then it sticks on right to the top of the console. It kind of took me a minute to line it up since they're so small, but I eventually got the top. And then I will flip the console over and get that bottom touch sensor in there. That looks pretty good. So now that we have the sensors in, before we reassemble the console, I am just going to clean up all the buttons and contacts with some isopropyl alcohol real quick, just to make sure that we're all good to go. So the buttons are looking good, and we'll get those reinstalled back into the casing. And then from here, now we're ready to reinstall the motherboard. We'll clip in that ribbon cable from the IPS screen, and we'll pop those two locking tabs back in to make sure it's locked in place. And then from here, I'm just going to ensure that the motherboard is lined up in the console. There should be nothing obstructing anywhere, and it should just line up pretty well and fit pretty smoothly in there. And it looks pretty good. So now that the motherboard's back in, I'm going to reinstall the L and R shoulder buttons, and then those two gray trim pieces on the side of the console we'll put back in the power button. And then reassembly is just the reverse of teardowns. So we will reinstall those 3 Phillips screws to hold the motherboard into the front half of the shell. Looking good. And then we'll pop back the rear half of the casing on there, and it seems to line up pretty well. So I'm going to get those 6 tri-wing screws back in there, and then that 1 Phillips head screw in the battery compartment. That all looks good from there. I'm going to reinstall those AA batteries. I also ordered a replacement battery cover, and this one matches up pretty well to the original or OEM Glacier color, and it snaps back in there pretty smoothly. All right, so let's pop a game in there, and here is the moment of truth. Let's turn it on. Man, that looks so good. The colors on the screen are super vibrant. I don't notice any visible ghosting or anything like that. It looks really good. And then I'm going to mess around with the 2 touch sensors. The bottom one is to adjust the screen brightness, and then the top is to adjust the color palette. I'm not really going to mess around too much with that since I don't really care. But the bottom one, you're able to adjust the brightness. It kind of runs the gamut. The lowest setting kind of is reminiscent of the original GBA SP. It kind of had that like low backlight. But the highest looks so good. The colors really pop on this screen. And everything seems to be running well. This is a super welcome upgrade. I'm stoked to have gotten it done, and overall it was pretty easy. There it is, guys. That was the IPS Screen Install on the GBA. Overall, like I said, it was a super easy process, and there was no soldering, so that made it even easier. There was definitely a little bit of a learning curve since it was my first time tearing down one of these GBAs. I do think if I do it next time, I would do a few things differently and probably get it done in about half the time that it took me now. I'd say the first run, it took me about 30 to 35 minutes. I think if you're on the fence about an IPS kit, I just say go for it because A, it's a really simple process, and B, it really does bring your GBA into the current year. The thing looks so good. So what did you guys think? Please be sure to let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you guys so much for checking out Retro Game Addict. I really do appreciate you all. Have an awesome day, and I will see you on the next one.